All right, hello one more time. So here we are in my basement again talking about AP government in the time of Corona. This episode is electing the president, part two, which is still covering nominations and primaries. So where we left off last time, we were talking about how the primary process works and how the closed primary system might impact some of primary politics. You read the text, read the essay in the Lanahan Reader called Getting Primaried, and so there's some understanding, I hope, there about the idea that, being primaried means that, you're going to face a challenge from within your own party, and essentially that has the effect of making people, have to toe the party line, be more Republican or more Democratic than they maybe wanted to be. Because the people who are voting for them, especially in closed primaries, where only members from that political party vote, where the people who are voting for them are among the most committed of their party, and they don't want to vote for somebody who's moderate or somebody who's wishy-washy. And so therefore, in a closed primary, these people are the ones who are making the decisions, and so therefore, primaries have a tendency, closed primaries, being primaried, has a tendency to create a candidate who is much more ideologically pure, or at least more committed to the party. A couple other things about primaries that are important to understand. So primaries have a tendency to be small elections. People don't come out to vote for them as much as they do for a large presidential, election. And because of that, each individual vote has a greater ability to sway the results of the election. The elections have a tendency to show more radical results. The larger the election, the opposite is true. The larger the election, the more moderating the effect of all those numbers is. And so you have a tendency to get people who are much more ideologically in the middle, compromisers. But if you have only 100 people voting, then one or two people who are on the outside edges ideologically have an ability to affect the results of the election much larger. And so therefore, small elections have a tendency to result in more ideologically pure or more Republican, Democratic committed candidates. And so put the two together. So on top of a small election, we have a closed primary, and because of that, we get we get different candidates in a closed primary. We get different candidates in a primary than maybe would be the candidate that is running for the presidency would have how they would run for the presidency in a large election for the whole country. So one of the things you need to think about then is, as you watch political campaigns, how does the strategy change for somebody when they go from the primaries to the general? So, who the candidate is and who they try to show themselves to be in a primary race while they're trying to, out-Democrat other Democrats or out-Republican other Republicans is going to be different than the person who's trying to, convince all of America to vote for them. And so, as you watch, think about how the candidates are trying to be the best Democrat ever or the best Republican ever. And then once the primaries are over, a lot of times they have a tendency to sort of tamp down some of that, anger, tamp down some of that, those ideas so that they're more, acceptable to other groups outside the party. So notice how they switch from one idea to the other when you watch the elections. You can see that this is happening more and more and more. This primaried idea that you read about, where parties in general and people within the party are using the primary more and more and more to try to keep the party, ideologically on the same lines or committed on the same lines. That means less negotiation, less compromise. Because if you compromise, we're going to primary you. Try and find somebody who's not willing to compromise because they're going to stick to their ideals. And you can see what's happened over time. There's been some, more and more closed primaries springing about across the country. Some of these states, this is from a 2015, map, and some of these states are, has changed. Others maybe not so much. But you can see that, what does it look like to you? Maybe a third of the states are operating in closed primaries, and another third operating in another few operating under semi-closed, depending upon what the definition of that is, state by state. And so you can see here in Montana we have an open primary, and as I discussed in the last video, an open primary basically means that you can vote for whichever party you want. Now, again, just a little review. Remember, in Montana, you have to declare when you go to the polling place, hey, I would like the Democratic ballot or the Republican ballot. You can't vote for just everybody, but you can make a choice. You do, yeah, I want to vote for the Democrats today, or I want to vote for the Republicans today, and so we do have open primaries here in Montana. The final option is a caucus, which basically is a meeting. So instead of a vote throughout the course of the day, people are going to meet at a certain time, at a certain place, like 7 o'clock at the school gym, and they're going to have themselves a meeting. And at the meeting, they're going to basically make a preference for the people in that meeting. And then there's going to be some sort of system, depending upon the state, for aggregating all those meetings and finding out, hey, across the whole state, so many people voted for this guy, so many people wanted this guy. Now, as you can see from the picture down here, this meeting often involves like actually moving and voting with your feet. If I want to be candidate C, I'm going to have to go over here with the candidate C people, and if I choose to change my mind and I want to go for vote candidate A, I'm going to make a very public walk over here, and of course that's going to raise some questions. Why did this happen? Why did this not happen? Why did you change your vote? In many ways, this is democracy at maybe its most pure in some people's minds. This is people actually going and they get in groups and they debate, they argue about whose candidate's best, and they make deals. It's like, hey, if you come over with our guy, we'll do this and that kind of thing. And and then they gather into these groups, and then somebody manages to tabulate it and aggregate it with other meetings that are occurring throughout the state. So this is essentially a meeting, which we're going to call a caucus. And you can see it operates kind of like a closed primary, because you don't get to go to the meeting unless you're a member of the party, right? So just like a closed primary, you only are in the meeting if you are a member of the party. And so therefore it has a lot of the same pros and cons as the closed primary does. Remember, all of this is trying to get these delegates. And so whether it's a primary or a caucus, a closed primary or an open primary, basically what we're trying to do is find out who do the people of this state want for their nominee from the party. And so we're all fighting for these delegates. We're all trying to get to a majority of delegates so that we can say, hey, I've got the most, and therefore I should be the nominee. And whether it's through primary process or caucus process, it's all the same idea. And so what would happen is at the course of the primary season, which begins usually in February and moves through June, we watch these delegates, and of course, people who are watching politics can figure out, oh, so-and-so's got so many delegates, so-and-so's in trouble because they're falling behind. And most of the time, by the time it gets to the fall, when we have ourselves the big national convention meeting where this officially is decided, most people already know who's going to be the nominee. And most of the time, most of the candidates have dropped out because they realize they're not going to win. And so the decision is actually kind of anticlimactic. Oh, it's like we already know Joe Biden's going to win the nomination. We don't need to have a convention. But we're going to have one anyway, where all these candidates come to the convention to cast ballots. So 37% of Republicans now at the caucus voted for Mitt Romney in 2012. And so 37.6% of Washington's delegates went to the national convention to cast their vote for Mitt Romney. Or at least they would have if all the other guys hadn't dropped out in 2012. And by the time we got to the convention, all of Washington's caucus members were voting for Mitt Romney because it was decided by then. So, what happens at the convention? Well, to some degree, not very much. So the delegates, as you can see, send their delegates, their states send their delegates to the convention based on population and loyalty, as I said before. Then, remember, these are decisions that the party themselves can make up. There's no laws that force the party to do anything. So it's, parties basically do this process themselves. Each delegate has different numbers. We've gone through this before. And then at the convention, the big hug. So if you look down here you got a picture of Joe Biden and Barack Obama in 2008. They were big rivals. They were fighting each other. They called each other names, all those kinds of horrible things that happen during an election campaign. And then at the convention, it's time for us all to be nice again. It's time for us to heal the wounds. We're all Democrats. We're going to get ready to go out there and fight those Republicans for the election, for the presidency. And so we all got to be on the same page and nice again. And so you have yourself the big hug. And here we have the big hug. President Obama, hugging Joe Biden as a way of everybody noticing, hey, everything's okay between us. We're good. Now let's go win an election. So the wounds are healed. Agreements reached by the candidates, if there isn't already an agreement. That's where those delegates come back into it. And we also have to come up with some sort of idea. What does it mean to be a Democrat? What does it mean to be a Republican? And essentially, we're going to write our platform. This is what we feel about this issue. This is what we feel about this issue. Now, in the world of the internet, this stuff has happened a lot already, and there's not as much happens in smoke-filled rooms in the back of the convention like it used to. But still, we come to an agreement about the convention. And then, of course, hey, what else do you do when you get 12,000 people that are all members of the same party, that all believe the same thing? You have yourself a great big party, right? And so, we get ourselves this, kind of silliness. This is, we're all really, really happy to be Republicans. We're all really, really happy to be, Democrats. And we're going to get ourselves all worked up. And we're going to get ourselves all excited because, hey, we got a rough road. Here comes the election. And we're going to, have to all be unified in order to do it. And so nothing unifies people like having themselves a nice, good time. Now, before I completely finish this unit off, your textbook does talk about a number of the issues about the primary and caucus system. You can see them on the screen there. Talk about disproportionate attention going to Iowa, New Hampshire, the early ones. A lot of people will choose not to run in them because, they're grueling and, maybe they feel like they've got the national attention they don't need to do so. Money plays too big of a role, especially in, primaries when, people's names are not well known and a little bit of money goes a long way. Participation is low. Generally we only get about 30 to 40% of people participating. Closed primaries tend to be more extreme, and too much power goes to the media because the media winds up covering these things. Before I finish this, however, I would like to talk about one last idea. I'm going to zoom back through my PowerPoint like here and talk about the delegates one last time. Starting in about the 1970s, the various parties started to put rules in place that made sure that the delegates' will was actually followed. Before that, and to some degree even since that, the delegates might come and the delegates might vote, but the party itself had some say, and history of the 20th century has had a couple times where the vote of the delegates was overruled by the party in one way or another. A lot of political scientists didn't like that. They thought it's undemocratic. It confuses the voters. Others would say, no, this is a very good idea because a lot of times, people can be, fooled, and the more politically savvy and the more, expert people that are running the party sometimes know best, and what's best is not necessarily what people want, right? So in order to protect that, both the parties have had what's called superdelegates, which are delegates who are not associated with any given state, but they basically are kind of free agents and they can vote for whoever they want. And they're like, presidents and governors and senators, people who are bigwigs within the party, and they vote not because of what the people want, but they vote for the party, what they think is best for the party. Over the years, the superdelegates have been reduced, and their impact has been eliminated. It has been reduced as well, but they still exist, and sometimes they still make the decision, especially in close primary races like we had last time with Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. So watch out for the superdelegates as you watch this process occur. All right. That's it for primaries and caucuses. And next time, we'll talk about the Electoral College. Have a good one.